Welcome to the Charles Carroll Society show. In today's show, I will show you that what happened in the Douglas High School in Broward County, Parkland, Florida, shooting was not an unknowable mistake. It was the direct consequence of willful choices made by the school board, the superintendent, Robert Rice, RUNCIE, Douglas High School principal T. Thompson, and the Broward County infamous sheriff, Sheriff Israel. And what is unique is I will demonstrate to you that this was paid for by international globalists. Essentially, this extreme violence is completely foreseeable and logical conclusions of policies and programs that were intentionally put into place by primarily Democratic government officials. Watching CNN interview with the sheriff and one of the CNN talking heads, it was one of the few people I know. You're like, what are you watching CNN for, Alex? But it was one of the few interviews that CNN actually did well. I'll see if I can find the interview here for you.
But let me ask you something else. A lot of people in the community have noted that the Broward County School Board entered into an agreement when you were sheriff in 2013 to pursue the, quote, least punitive means of discipline against students. This news policy encouraged warnings, consultations with parents, and programs on conflict resolution instead of arresting students for crimes. Were there not incidents committed by this shooter as a student, had this new policy not been in place, that otherwise he would have been arrested for and not able to legally buy a gun?
What you're referring to is the PROMISE program, and it's giving the school has the ability, under certain circumstances, not to call the police, not to get the police involved on misdemeanor offenses, and take care of it within the school. It's an excellent program. It's helping many, many people. What this program does is not put a person at 14, 15, 16 years old into the criminal justice system.
What if he should be in the criminal justice system? What if he does something violent to a student? What if he takes bullets to school? What if he takes knives to school? What if he threatens the lives of fellow students?
Then he goes to jail. That's not
what happened
in the PROMISE program.
But that's not what happened with the shooter.
During that interview, if you notice, he says something like, hey, you're attacking the PROMISE program. And I'm looking at CNN going, well, what the heck is the PROMISE program? So I start digging and I start researching. Well, come to find out, the PROMISE program is a program put into place not to refer students to the police. How did the guy keep doing things? How did he get away with things? Because he was specifically in part of a program that they signed to not refer him basically no matter how bad his behavior became. The PROMISE program includes a collaborative agreement on school discipline. It says things like harassment, throwing chairs, possession of weed, cannabis, threats, obstruction of justice without violence. All of that should not be referred to law enforcement. It says it in writing. Have you heard that from anywhere? Have you heard that from Tucker? Have you heard that from Hannity? No, you haven't. The Memorandum of Understanding is out there. I've gotten it now. The Memorandum of Understanding says, do not refer these kids to the sheriff's office for threats. That's how the guy was making threats and never referred, which then allowed him to continue to buy guns. In addition, I found, and it's a blurry copy, I'll put the original over at the blog, Charles Carroll Society. It had a 7-step process that the local sheriff office agreed to follow before arresting a minor student. It stated that the school principal, Ty Thompson, was the primary decision maker when responding to student misbehavior. It was Ty Thompson specifically who did not refer that school shooter to the police under their own program. It says he's the primary person responsible. In this document that I have found and I'm breaking, that I have not seen it reported almost any other place, it said it is a crime if a crime is PROMISE eligible, officers are, whatever PROMISE eligible, PROMISE eligible, officers are to do this: issue a verbal warning, taking the student out of the situation in order to cool off? Or can they do some other intervention other than arresting the student? Can the student be held accountable through another form of collaborative problem solving team, perhaps a PROMISE program or a community-based program? Why did he get called 39 times and not arrested? Because it says not to. 7 steps they have to follow before arresting him. Are there alternatives to arrest that could solve the situations? Officers were encouraged to call the school district designated at the student support initiatives for guidance before arresting students. Now this all beginning to make sense. Broward County Sheriff Deputies signed an agreement not to arrest a shooter for all of his many offenses. They signed it. Why hasn't Sheriff Israel just simply said it? According to our Memorandum of Understanding, according to the PROMISE program, we were encouraged not to arrest him all of these many times. Where have you heard that from? That's why it's breaking news here. I have found evidence that criminals immediately begin to take advantage of this program. They start putting gang members in schools. Hey, if a gangbanger is slinging whatever, but he might get jacked and thrown in jail. But if he's in school, he won't. I found when we're doing some research for this, a lot of people aren't covering this and sharing. But I found a website called Thread Reader, which is breaking information from various internal affairs that demonstrate that the police officers were encouraged to change official police documents to make crimes less serious so that they can keep their numbers down. Now, why do you say, you always go, well, Alex, why is everybody doing this? And what's the answer to that almost every single time? It's the money. As the school was showing that its crime was going down, they were eligible for more funding because they were doing such a good job. Well, crime was happening. They simply weren't reporting it. So they had an environment, an atmosphere to not report crimes. That is why the crimes weren't being reported. And if you go look at this guy did a great job. He says, as Miami-Dade began to receive benefits, political and finance from the scheme, Broward County showed in. An approach in Broward was approached into Miami-Dade. It's important to remember that this was not arbitrary language in this Memorandum of Understanding. This is a well-planned fundamental shift from the entire dynamics of how teenagers will be treated when engaging in criminal conduct. Initially, the police were excusing misdemeanors. However, it didn't take long until felonies, even violent felonies, just like this shooter, armed robberies, assaults, and worse, were being excused. He gives an example here that shows, in reference to the found property, because this is a document from an internal affairs, in reference to the found property, because he told me he wrote it up as found property because, of the situation, there was a lot of arrests being made at Michael Crop. There were a lot of drug-related cases that needed to cut back on any type of crime that was going on there, and that it came up from this supervisor in chain. They continued to need to lower arrests to show that they were improving upon this, stopping the school to prison program. The police were in a bind. They were encountering evidence of criminal conduct, and yet they had to hide the conduct. There were examples of burglary, robbery, where the police had to hide the recorded evidence in order to let the kids get away with it. That's incredible. These school cops also have they talk about how the school cops was a nice laid back position. A lot came out during an earlier internal affairs investigation. Unfortunately, the behavior never changed because the police had never changed, and it's still going on. He says in this internal affairs document, listen, the information that the officer Dunn gave me is completely different from what the police report is stating about the marijuana. Right, okay, all right. But just for the record, he did also expand and say, yes, that he was told he wrote it that way. He was told that he needed to go back on all of the delinquency acts. Okay, and mention any specific supervisors. For years, this has been happening and no one cared. Crime happened, students excused, victims ignored. The Broward County School and law enforcement system is designed to flow to avoid putting people in jail. Exactly what happened. So I'll put a link to that so you can go read their own direct evidence. Now, the next piece of information. So now how did he get it late? let go all this time? There was a memorandum of understanding between the Broward County Sheriff and the Broward County School to let them go. And they were encouraged to let more and more violent crimes go. So I keep looking at this and I'm like, well, let's go take a look at this memorandum of understanding. I go find it on the internet. Well, as you guys know, this all begins to make sense because they have this memorandum. It's here. It's like, how did anybody come up with such a terrible idea of not locking violent criminals away simply because they were going to school? So I download the PDF. Now, some of you know, I'm a technologist by trade. So I could start opening up this PDF and I start looking at metadata, the metadata of the PDF. What is this? Who wrote this? Is there anything left in here? Well, there was. There was metadata left in the PDF. One of the names I found in the metadata on the PDF was a name, Alana Greer, A-L-A-N-A, Greer, G-R-E-E-R. Huh, who's this person? This is the person who wrote the MOU that the sheriff's deputies and the school district signed to ensure that all the kids are let go. So I go look at her, and I find that she was the co-founder of the Community Justice Report. Here are some of the words of the woman who wrote the MOU that established a policy to let the school shooter and the Florida Valentine massacre get away. She said, Alan Runt on the 2nd of February 2017. She wrote this on February 2nd of February 2017. She wrote it for a magazine called The New Tropic in a piece titled, and you'll love this, "The Law is Not Going to Save Us." Well, if the law is not going to save us, what will? She said, we should celebrate the victories in court, but then get out in the street and demand more. Use the momentum that legal strategies can create to strengthen organizing. Hold us lawyers accountable to the community, question our strategies when they don't cater to the voices of directly impacted people and those being targeted by white supremacy and the patriarchy. But if we organize, hold our elected leaders accountable, take direction from the immigrant, take direction from the Muslim and other impacted communities, and work together, we've got this. The law is not going to save us. That's a little taste of who she is. Well, so I'm looking through this and going, okay, she wrote this. She's a far leftist. Is that where this thread ends? And of course it does not. So I start looking through her bio, and she said that she worked for something called the Advancement Project. To do what? To end the school to prison pipeline. So that's why she was writing the Memorandum of Understanding, is she literally was the staff attorney for the Advancement Project to end the school to prison pipeline. So I keep digging. What is this Advancement Project? It says the Advancement Project. This organization works to, well, this is not what they said. This is information that I found elsewhere on the internet. This organization works to organize communities of color into politically cohesive units while disseminating its leftist worldviews and values as broadly as possible by way of a very sophisticated communication department. And in reading her article, we can see that's true. So we keep digging. Who is this? Who's behind the Advancement Project that this woman worked for to write this document? Something called the Open Society Foundations, OSF. And who funds the Open Societies Foundation? George Soros. And now it makes a lot more sense. A George Soros Open Society Foundation funded the Advancement Project, which is focused on stopping the school to prison pipeline by not arresting criminals. That organization helps write up these promise-like programs to not enforce the law in school and for students. One such program was implemented in Broward County, written by someone named Alana Greer, a complete anti-Trump radical leftist. This Memorandum of Understanding implementing the Promise program, written by Alana, covered the Parkland School. It specifically called for not reporting students to the police for threats and many other infractions. It is a very long, involved seven-step process to even try to arrest any child, period. Or, by the way, to refer him for psychological help. This policy directed and mandated that the sheriff deputies, school administrators, and others would not report the school shooter for his many previous infractions. And now the sheriff is throwing, people know I'm not this huge fan of law enforcement, but the sheriff is now throwing his deputies under the bus for a memorandum of understanding that he wrote, that he signed, that he enforced. Patriots, Republicans, the NRA, we ran into a buzzsaw in this issue. We were completely outplayed. The law enforcement and school officials decided not to enforce the law. That's simply true. It's in the MOU. But now they're demanding what? More gun control. We don't enforce the laws. We allow the criminals to go free, but we are going to take guns from law-abiding Americans. That's our strategy. That's our strategy. And who has had this strategy for a very long time of disarming America? George Soros, the Nazi collaborator and one of the primary funders of the Progressive Democratic Party. This violence by a student at this school was a natural, logical, and completely foreseeable outcome of not enforcing laws inside of schools. You don't enforce laws inside of school, you'll get more and more criminal behavior that will get more and more violent. If you appreciate independent citizen journalism, please subscribe, share, and mash that like button. I'm guarantee you that YouTube's going to try to put this in a dark corner of the internet and not let anybody see this work. Please get it out. Please share it. Please share the link. Please connect with me in comments below. I try to really respond to every comment I get down there. Because the attack on conservative anti-globalist voices by the social media companies in America, you can also primarily find me on my own self-hosted blog, charlescarrollsociety.com, and on Minds at @MrAlexBarron. If you want Western civilization, Christianity, and liberty to survive, you are personally responsible with finding some way to demonstrate your non-compliance to this post-Christian system. Every week, try to perform some small action of protest, some small action of self-reliance and non-compliance. Viva Cristo Rey. Viva Cristo Rey. Viva Cristo Rey, either Virgin of Guadalupe.